You cannot even count, the Duke of Ellingfold said, without looking up. So do not pretend to advise me on my own affairs. The maid did not flinch, which surprised him. She stood in the doorway of the muniment room with a coal scuttle in her hands and ash on her cuff, and she looked past him, not at him, past him at the great leather ledger lying open across his desk. The candle flame bent. Somewhere below, the house clock struck 11. Sir, she said quietly, you are being robbed. Alaric Vane, 9th Duke of Ellingfold, was not a man accustomed to being interrupted, and certainly not by a servant with cinders on her sleeve. He had spent the evening staring at columns of figures that swam like minnows, and he had a headache of the particular kind that comes of pretending to understand a thing one does not. He set down his pen with great care, because he did not trust himself to set it down carelessly. Say that again. You are being robbed. She did not soften it. She only shifted the scuttle to her hip, as though it had grown heavy. The page you are looking at. The right-hand column has been carried wrong, 3 times on that page alone, always in the same direction. And which direction is that? Away from you, your grace. The fire behind him popped. Alaric felt, absurdly, the back of his neck grow warm. Come here. She hesitated. Of course she hesitated. He was aware, in a distant way, of what he looked like at that hour, coat off, cravat loosened, 6 feet and some inches of black temper in a room full of paper. Servants at Ellingfold had a way of finding urgent business in other corridors when he was in this humour, and he had never troubled to correct the habit. It was useful to be feared. It saved conversation. But she came. She set the scuttle down on the hearthstone with a small deliberate clink, wiped her palms on her apron twice, and crossed the carpet, and stopped at the corner of the desk where the light fell. Your name, he said. Hester, sir. Hester Linwood. How long have you been in this house, Hester Linwood? 4 months and 11 days. That precision. He noted it the way one notes a stone in a boot. And in 4 months and 11 days you have learned to read a ducal ledger upside down, across a room, by candlelight. Yes, sir. That is not modesty. You did not ask for modesty, sir. You asked how long. Alaric looked at her properly for the first time. She was young, 25 perhaps, with a plain grey gown, a plain white cap, and a face that would have been unremarkable if it had not been so entirely unafraid. Her hands were red at the knuckles from cold water. Her chin was up, and her eyes kept going back to the ledger the way a hound's nose goes back to a scent, helplessly as if she were being tugged. Show me, he said. He turned the great book toward her. She did not touch it. She leaned and put one finger a half-inch above the page as though the paper were hot, and traced. She said, Michaelmas Quarter. Timber sold from the Coombe plantation, £412. But the entry above it says the same timber was carted at a cost of £190. That is a monstrous cost for carting, sir, and it does not appear anywhere in the wagon accounts, which I have carried up to this room every Tuesday since March, and which I have, forgive me, read while I laid the fire. She moved her finger down. And here, the rents from the Kettleford farms. They are set down as a total, not as 31 separate sums. A total cannot be checked, sir. A man who wishes to be checked writes out his 31 sums. A man who does not writes a total. That is bookkeeping. That is hiding, she said. The clock ticked. Alaric discovered he was standing, though he did not remember rising. You said 3 errors on the page. The third is the worst. She looked up then, and met his eyes, and did not look away, and something in his chest performed an unfamiliar and unwelcome manoeuvre. The page carries forward 11,406. The page before it ends at 11,460. 60, not 6. Somebody has taken £54 by turning a page. £54, he repeated. You would have me tear my house apart over £54. No, your grace. Her voice was very level. I would have you tear your house apart over the fact that a man who steals £54 where he can be caught is certainly stealing 5,000 where he cannot. For a long moment the Duke of Ellingfold said nothing at all. Then he said, You may go. She curtsied, a good curtsy, better than a housemaid's, took up her scuttle and went. At the door she paused, and he thought she would say something else, some plea or apology or bid for reward, and he was aware of a small ugly hope that she would. because then he might dismiss her from his mind as one more grasping creature and go to bed. "Good night, sir," was all she said. "The Coombe plantation has no cart road. That is why I noticed." The door closed. Alaric stood alone in the muniment room with £54 and a headache, and did not go to bed for a very long time. He did not sleep. That was the first indignity. The second was that at 6:30 in the morning he was on horseback in a raw grey drizzle, riding the eastern boundary of his own estate like a poacher, to see whether there was a cart road to the Coombe plantation. There was not. There was a bridle path, a stream with no bridge, and 400 acres of standing timber that had, according to his ledger, been felled, carted and sold at Michaelmas. He sat his horse in the wet for a full minute, looking at trees that were not supposed to exist, and felt the ground of his life shift very quietly beneath him. Crandall Pike had been steward of Ellingfold for 19 years. He had served Alaric's father. He had held the estate together through the 2 black years when Alaric was in the peninsula and the old Duke was dying by inches, and he had met Alaric at the gate on his return with tears in his eyes and the keys in his hand. He was a soft-voiced, sandy, stooping man who apologized for the weather as though he had made it. He had taught Alaric to shoot. Alaric rode home and did not send for him. Instead he sent for the housekeeper, Mrs. Gantry, and asked her, in a tone he tried to make idle, what she knew of a housemaid named Linwood. Mrs. Gantry's mouth did the thing mouths do when a question has been dreaded. "A very good worker, your grace. Very quiet. Very clean." "Where did she come from?" "Bristol, sir. She had a character from a Mrs. Poole." "She, the housekeeper, stopped. Say it." "She was a clerk, sir. It came out of Mrs. Gantry like a confession of murder. Her father kept the books for a shipping house on the quays, and she kept them for him when his eyes failed, and when he died the partners would not keep a woman at the desk, and there was a debt, and she came to service, sir, because a woman may not be a clerk, but she may always carry coal. And you did not think to tell me this." "Your Grace," said Mrs. Gantry, with the flat courage of a woman who has run a house for 30 years, "you have not asked me a question about a servant since you came home from the war." That, too, was true. Alaric let her go. He found Hester Linwood on the back stairs at 4 in the afternoon with a bucket of sand and a scrubbing brush on her knees, and he stood 2 steps above her and said, "There is no cart road to the Coombe." She sat back on her heels. She did not gloat. He would remember that afterwards, that she did not gloat, not once, not ever in all that followed. "No, sir." "How long have you known this house is being emptied?" 6 weeks. "And you said nothing?" "I am a housemaid, your Grace," she said, "and you are the Duke of Ellingfold. And if I had come to you 6 weeks ago, with a bucket in my hand, and told you your steward was a thief, you would have turned me off without a character by supper, and I would have been on the Bristol road by dark with nothing, and Mr. Pike would have gone on stealing, and I would have gained precisely nothing but the pleasure of having been right. So you waited. I agreed, until you asked. I did not ask. I insulted you." "Yes, sir." And then, he was never afterwards able to describe it exactly, the corner of her mouth moved. "You said I could not count. It was very rude, and it was very useful. A man who says a thing like that has stopped watching the person he says it to." Alaric Vane, who had faced French artillery at close range and had once told a marquis to his face that he was a fool, discovered that he had no reply whatever. "Get up," he said at last, roughly. "Leave the sand. It will stain if it dries, Miss Linwood." She got up. He took her to the muniment room, and he locked the door, and he laid before her 19 years of ledgers, great cracked spines, calf and vellum, going back to before he was born, and he said the hardest sentence he had said in a decade. "I do not understand these. I never have. My father did not teach me, and I was 16 when he stopped, and I have been ashamed of it ever since, and I have hidden it by being unpleasant to anyone who came near it." He set his knuckles on the desk. "You will teach me, and we will find what he has taken." Hester Linwood looked at the ledgers, and then at him, and her face did something extraordinary. It lit, not with triumph, with hunger, the pure, greedy delight of a scholar handed a locked library. She said, "I shall need a great deal of paper." She needed a great deal of paper. For 11 days the muniment room at Ellingfold was a fortress. Alaric gave out that he was reviewing the timber leases, which was true in the way that a battlefield is a field. Mrs. Gantry, grim and glorious, arranged for Hester's duties to be quietly absorbed by two other girls and told the servants' hall that anyone who gossiped would answer to her. Trays came to the door. The fire was kept up. And behind the locked door, a duke and a housemaid took 19 years apart, line by line. She was a merciless teacher. "You are guessing," she said on the second morning, when he pushed a column at her with the air of a man surrendering a sword. "I am adding." "You are adding hopefully." "That is guessing." She turned the page back to him. "Again. And do not carry in your head, sir, carry on the paper. The head is where errors go to hide. You realize," Alaric said, "that men have been called out for less. Then they were poor at addition and worse at pistols." She did not look up. Again. He did it again. He got it right. She said "good," in exactly the tone one uses to a dog that has finally sat, and Alaric Vane sat in his own muniment room and laughed aloud. A startling, rusty noise that he had not heard from himself since before Spain. She glanced up at that. Something crossed her face and was gone. Again, she said, more gently. The thing came apart slowly, and then all at once, which is how such things come apart. It was not one theft. It was an architecture. Crandall Pike had built it patiently over 19 years, the way a swallow builds under an eave, mouthful by mouthful, and it had held because nobody had ever, in all that time, asked it to bear weight. There were the phantom cartages, £190 here, 240 there, paid to a firm of holiers called Stainer and Sons of Ludgate, who had been paid, over 19 years, £4,180 to move timber down a road that did not exist. There were the Kettleford rents, set down as totals, never as sums, and when Hester made Alaric ride out and collect the tenants' receipts, 31 of them, in 31 hands, some of them crosses, the totals were short by 11 shillings a quarter each, every quarter, for 11 years. 11 shillings, Alaric said, holding a receipt from a widow named Fenn who had signed with a cross. He robbed a woman with a cross for her name of 11 shillings a quarter. He robbed her, Hester said, because she could not check him. That is the whole of it, sir. He steals wherever a man cannot count, or a woman can. She bent her head over her paper. Her ears were pink. He had noticed that they went pink and had begun, in a way that alarmed him, to look for it. There were the repairs. Roofs at Ash End that had been mended 4 times in 6 years and were, when Alaric climbed a ladder in the rain to see for himself, still bare rafters and sky, with a family of 5 under them. There was the wine account. There was a horse called Emperor, bought for 300 guineas, entered twice, and never in any stable he owned. There was a school, Alaric's own mother's foundation, £12 a year for a schoolmaster in the village of Barrow Ellingfold. Paid faithfully in the ledger every Lady Day for 16 years to a schoolmaster who had died in 1809 and been buried at Ellingfold's expense, which expense Pike had also charged twice. On the 11th day, Hester ruled a line under the last column, and set down her pen and pressed the heels of her hands against her eyes. "How much?" said Alaric. "You should sit down. How much, Hester?" She had never remarked on his use of her name, and she did not now. £19,640, she said, "and some shillings. I have not the heart to give you the shillings." The fire cracked. Out beyond the tall window, rooks went up out of the elms in a black ragged handful. Alaric sat down after all. "That is not merely theft," he said at last. "That is my father's last years. That is the Ash End roofs. That is why I could not lower the Kettleford rents when they asked me, and had to tell them the estate would not bear it. I told them the estate would not bear it." His voice had gone very quiet. "I stood in that church porch and told a widow that my land could not spare her 11 shillings. Your Grace, do not." He was on his feet again. He put his hand flat on the ledger, and the great book seemed suddenly a small mean thing. 19 years, and I did not see it, because I was too proud to admit that a column of figures could beat me. He counted on that. He counted on it, Hester, and he was right. He was. He turned on her, half expecting comfort and half wanting a fight, and she gave him neither. "He was right about you," she said, standing, "and you have spent 11 days proving him wrong. And you are the only duke in England, I should think, who would have locked himself in a room with a housemaid and let her teach him to add." So do not stand there tearing yourself to pieces, sir. When there is a thief in your steward's house who will burn every paper he has the moment he knows we are counting. Silence. That, said Alaric Vane, is the most impertinent thing anyone has ever said to me. I know, sir. Do it again. The corner of her mouth moved. Not until you have eaten something. They had, of course, been seen. The county had begun to talk within a week, because the county always does. It was said that the Duke of Ellingfold had a woman locked in his muniment room. It was said at Lady Marchbank's whist table that she was a housemaid and a Bristol clerk's daughter, and that she had got her hooks into him. It was said that she had bewitched him with figures, which several ladies agreed was a novel method. It was said, by an amiable idiot named Cottrell, that no doubt she was very pretty, at which the Duke of Ellingfold, who had come into the room behind him, said, "She is very exact," in a voice that ended the subject, the conversation and Mr. Cottrell's invitation to shoot in November. But it was Crandall Pike who moved first, because a cornered man always does. He came to Alaric on a Sunday, hat in hand, sandy and stooping and soft-voiced, with tears standing ready in his eyes as if he kept them in a drawer. "Your Grace," he said, "I am grieved, truly grieved. It is not my place, but I have served this house since before you could reach the stirrup, and there is a matter I cannot in conscience keep from you." "Then do not keep it." The girl Linwood. Pike's face was all sorrow. Mrs. Gantry's silver. "A snuff-box, the old Duke's, with the hair on the lid, God rest him, has gone from the still-room cupboard, and it has been found, sir." He paused and produced it from his coat like conjurer producing a very sad rabbit, in her box, under her linen. I would not have believed it. A pretty face and a sharp tongue, and we are all of us fools. Alaric looked at the snuff-box with the hair on the lid. He thought, quite calmly, that he had never in his life wanted so badly to break a man's jaw. "You searched a servant's box," he said, "without the housekeeper." Pike's eyes flickered. It was very small, that flicker, and 19 years of soft-voiced service went out of it like a candle. Mrs. Gantry was engaged, sir. Mrs. Gantry has been engaged for 30 years, and has never once been too engaged to hold the keys to a servant's box. Because they hang on her belt, Pike, and I know they hang on her belt, because I have spent 11 days learning to look at things I never troubled to look at before. Alaric took the snuff-box from the man's hand, and turned it over, and set it on the mantel, and did not raise his voice at all. "Which linen was it under?" "Sir, her linen, you said." "Under her linen. Was it under, or between, or at the bottom of the box, Mr. Pike? A man who has truly found a thing remembers where he found it. A man who has put a thing somewhere remembers only that he put it." The steward's mouth opened and closed. "Go home," Alaric said. "Go home to your house, my house, and sit in it, and touch nothing. You will hear from me on Thursday." When the door had shut, he stood for a while with his hand on the mantel, next to the little silver hair, and found that he was shaking. He found Hester in the muniment room, and she looked up and saw his face, and went white. "He has done something," she said. "He has tried to hang you for a snuff-box." She sat down slowly, and then this was the thing that undid him, that he thought of afterwards more than any of it. She did not weep, and she did not rage. She reached for a fresh sheet of paper. "Then he is frightened," she said, "and frightened men are careless. Sir, we must go to the Ludgate hauliers, Stainer and Sons. If they exist, they will have books, and their books will not agree with his. And if they do not exist, Hester, if they do not exist, then somebody has been endorsing their receipts for 19 years, and the hand on those receipts, sir, is the same hand that writes carried forward in that ledger, only leaning the other way, which anybody may see who has been made to copy her father's ship's manifests for 6 years until her fingers ached. Hester," she stopped. "He might have destroyed you," Alaric said. "Do you understand that? A word from him, a magistrate, a snuff-box, you would have been transported. And you are sitting there thinking about handwriting." Hester Linwood looked at him for a long moment. Ash on a cuff, ink on her fingers, chin up. "Yes, your Grace," she said, "because thinking about handwriting is how I shall not be transported, and because," her voice did, at last, waver. "Only once," and she mastered it. "Because I find I am not frightened, and I have been asking myself why. And the answer is that you locked the door of this room 11 days ago, and never once, in all that time, Asked me to prove I was worth listening to. She swallowed. Nobody has ever done that. Not my father, not the partners. Nobody. The fire cracked. Alaric crossed the room and took the pen out of her hand and set it down. Thursday, he said. We will need a magistrate, a clerk, and every book in Ludgate. And Mrs. Gantry. And Mrs. Gantry, he agreed. God help him. Stainer and Sons of Ludgate did not exist. There was a Stainer, a tallow chandler of that name, 60 years old and stone deaf, who had never owned a wagon in his life and who was astonished, and then delighted, to learn that he had been a haulier of timber for 19 years. There was no firm, no yard, no ledger. There was, however, a bank in Cheapside where an account in the name of Stainer and Sons had received £4,180 in 19 years by draft on the Ellingfold estate, and had paid it out again, quarter by quarter, in cash. To a soft-voiced sandy gentleman who always apologized for the weather, Alaric brought that back from London on the Wednesday night in a locked dispatch box, and did not sleep and did not need to. They met in the long library on Thursday at noon, because the muniment room was too small for what was about to happen in it. Sir Marcus Wren, the magistrate, sat at the head of the table with his clerk. Mrs. Gantry stood at the door with her keys, like an angel with a flaming sword. The Duke of Ellingfold stood at the window with his hands behind his back. And Hester Linwood, in a grey gown with ink on her fingers, and a stack of paper 11 inches high squared before her, sat at the table's foot, where a duke had placed a chair for her with his own hands, in front of a magistrate, in front of God and the Count. Crandall Pike came in and saw the paper first. Alaric watched him see it. He watched 19 years arrive all at once in a man's face. Your Grace, Pike said. Sir Marcus, I understood this was a matter of a theft in the servants' hall. It is, said Alaun. The clerk read the charge. Pike answered it beautifully. He was very good. Alaric had to give him that. He was moving and modest and hurt, and he spoke of 19 years of service, and of the old Duke's trust, and of his grief that a young woman of low character, taken into the house without proper inquiry, should have poisoned the ear of a young master too generous to suspect. Miss Linwood, said Alaric. She stood. Sir Marcus, she said, I am going to trouble you with figures. I am sorry for it. I shall try to make them short. She made them very short indeed, and she made them like a woman driving nails. She began with the road. She laid the estate map before the magistrate and asked him to find the cart road to the Coombe plantation, and let him look for a full half-minute, and then said, There is none, sir. There has never been one. The timber was never carted, because the timber is still standing, and your worship may ride out and touch it this afternoon. She went to the totals. She spread the 31 Kettleford receipts across the table in a great fan, 31 hands, 11 crosses, and set beside them Pike's neat single line, said 11 shillings from each, sir, every quarter for 11 years. £632, taken from people who cannot check a total. Mrs. Fenn of Kettleford is here in the hall, if your worship wishes to hear from her. She has walked 4 miles. She went to the schoolmaster. She read out the burial entry, and then the 16 Lady Day payments of £12 to a dead man, and the room, which had been very quiet, became quieter, and then she went to the hand. There are £4,180, she said, paid to Stainer and Sons of Ludgate who do not exist. Here are the receipts. 19 years of them. They are written to look like the hand of a clerk in a haullier's office, and they lean to the right, and the ledger leans to the left. She laid 2 sheets side by side and turned them so that Sir Marcus could see. But a man may change the lean of his letters, sir. He cannot change the way he crosses a double T, or the little hook he puts on his terminal I, or the fact that he writes the figure 7 with a bar through it, which is a shipping clerk's habit, and a very unusual one in Gloucestershire, and which appears in the Stainer receipts, in the Ellingfold ledger, and in the note Mr. Pike wrote to Mrs. Gantry last Michaelmas asking for the still-room key. She set that note down too. He asked for the key, she said, in his own hand, and the snuff-box came out of that cupboard. Nobody moved. Sir Marcus, said Hester Linwood, I am a housemaid, and I know precisely what my word is worth against a steward's, so I have not asked you to take my word for anything. Every sheet before you is in his hand or in the tenant's hands or in the parish register. I have only put them side by side. She sat down. That is all I have ever done. Crandall Pike did not confess. Men of that kind seldom do. He said the word malice and the word designing, and he had got as far as a woman of that sort when the Duke of Ellingfold turned from the window. Say it, Alaric said. Finish the sentence. Say what sort. Pike looked at him and did not finish the sentence. You were right about me, Alaric said. That is the part I shall be a long time forgiving. You knew I could not read my own books, and you knew I would rather die than say so, and you built a 19-year theft on my vanity. And you were right, Pike. For 19 years you were entirely right. He came down the length of the table. And then a girl carried a coal scuttle into my room and told me the truth to my face, and I asked her to teach me, and that is the whole of your undoing. Not the ledgers, not the bank. That. He stopped. A man asked to be taught, and you never thought he would. They took Crandall Pike out through the hall, past a widow named Fenn who had walked 4 miles, and Sir Marcus Wren shook Hester Linwood's hand at the door and told her, with the bluntness of a man of 60, that she had a better head than his clerk, and that his clerk had been to Cambridge. The county talked, of course. It talked for a year. It talked when the Duke of Ellingfold appointed a woman, a Bristol clerk's daughter, my dear housemaid, to keep the books of Ellingfold at a salary of £90 a year, with a room of her own, a fire of her own, and a key to the muniment room that hung at her own belt. It talked louder when the ash-end roofs went on before the winter, and when the Kettleford rents came down 11 shillings and stayed down, and when Mrs. Fenn's grandson went to the new school at Barrow Ellingfold, where there was at last a living schoolmaster. And it talked itself hoarse when the Duke of Ellingfold at the Marchbank ball walked past the daughters of 4 earls and offered his arm to the woman in the plain green gown by the pillar, who had come because he had asked her to come, and who had told him twice on the drive that she did not dance. You do not dance, he agreed, leading her out. I do not, sir. Nor do I. We shall be very bad at it together, and it will be observed, and tomorrow every drawing-room in the county will say that the Duke of Ellingfold cannot dance and cannot count, and has taken up with a clerk. He turned her badly. They will be right in every particular, and I find I do not care about a single one of them. You care a great deal, said Hester, or you would not have said it so loudly. Miss Linwood, your grace. I have made a calculation, Alaric said, and I have checked it 3 times on paper, carrying nothing in my head, in accordance with instruction. The music went on. His hand was warm through her glove. I have been a duke for 11 years, and I have been happy for 1, and the difference between the 2 figures is a woman who told me I was being robbed when she could have held her tongue and kept her place. That is the sum. I have carried it forward. It does not change. She had gone very still. I am not asking you to be grateful, he said. You have nothing to be grateful for. I owe you £19,000 and a great deal more than that. I am asking whether you could bear to spend a life with a man who is slow at figures, worse at dancing, and quite unable to imagine a single morning of the rest of it without you sitting at the other end of that table telling him he has guessed. The candles burned. The county watched in that dreadful ringing silence that falls on a ballroom when something is happening. Sir, said Hester Linwood, you have made an error. The Duke of Ellingfold's heart stopped. You said 11 years a duke and 1 year happy. Her chin was up. Her eyes were bright and not quite steady, and not looking away. But you were happy on the 2nd morning, when you added the Coombe column correctly and laughed like a rusty gate. I made a note of it. I make a note of everything. Her hand tightened on his. It is 1 year and 11 days, Alaric, and I will not have the books wrong. They were married in the spring at Barrow Ellingfold, in a church full of tenants and servants, and one deaf tallow chandler from Ludgate who had insisted, and Mrs. Gantry cried into her keys, and the new schoolmaster's pupils sang, and every quarter day thereafter, for a great many years. The Duke and Duchess of Ellingfold shut themselves in the muniment room with the ledgers and the paper and a decanter of ratafia, and did the accounts together, she reading, he adding, the fire high. And the household learned that if you passed the door on a quarter-day evening you would sometimes hear a woman's voice say, quite clearly, "You are guessing again, sir," and a duke's voice answer, without any temper in it at all, "Teach me."